The bucket tipped over, spilling dirty water over the shiny floor. "Wipe it with your tongue," she shouted, laughing. But that reflection in the glass, the watchful gaze of a man in the box, would change the fate of the three girls. The bucket tipped over before anyone could react. Dirty water spread across the white floor like a stain of exposed shame. The triplets froze, 3 pairs of hands still clutching damp cloths, 3 breaths held in the supermarket's frigid air conditioning. The ambient music continued softly, indifferently. Customers dodged their carts, protecting their expensive shoes. The manager emerged from the aisle, stiletto heels hitting the floor like a gavel in judgment. She smiled. It wasn't joy, it was power distilled into the curve of her lips. "Clean it with your tongue," she shouted, pointing to the puddle. Laughter erupted from some customers. Others lowered their eyes, complicit in the silence. The eldest of the triplets, Ayanna, felt her blood rush hotly to her temples. But she didn't move. The manager stepped forward and deliberately stepped in the dirty water, spreading it even further. "Learn to shine the ground as if it were your skin." The venom of the sentence hung in the air. Ayanna clenched the cloth between her fingers until her knuckles turned white. Beside her, Amara bit her lower lip hard, the taste of blood mixed with swallowed rage. The third, Nia, trembled, but didn't cry. Not yet. The manager crossed her arms, expecting submission, but something changed in the girl's gazes. It wasn't defiance, it was a silent firmness, a steel thread piercing her spine. Ayanna bent down slowly, picked up the fallen bucket, and lifted it with both hands. Every gesture was controlled, almost ceremonial. The manager frowned. She expected tears, visible humiliation. What she received was an erect posture and fixed eyes. In the reflection of the box's glass, a man watched everything. Dark gray suit, arms crossed, jaw tense. He didn't look away for a second. He jotted something down on his phone unhurriedly, without apparent anger, just a cold record of an injustice he'd witnessed. No one downstairs noticed. All attention was on the 3 black girls standing in the center of the involuntary stage. The manager turned around, pleased with the spectacle. But when she turned away, she didn't see what the man in the glass saw. Shame beginning to turn into resistance born in silence. The first crack in her control. The triplets stood in sync, as if they'd been rehearsing this movement their entire lives. There was no rush, no desperation. Ayanna folded the floor cloth with meticulous care, each fold precise, each corner aligned. The gesture was simple but carried ancient weight. Amara picked up the mop and leaned it against the wall, steady, unhurried. Nia wiped her hands on her worn uniform and took a deep breath, expanding her chest like someone gasping for air after a long swim. Their silence was deafening, heavier than any scream. The manager stopped in the middle of the hallway, irritated. She expected vocal submission, shaky apologies, and downcast eyes. She received only 3 serene faces and a disturbing stillness. She turned abruptly, her heels scraping the floor. "Is this how you learn?" He spat out the phrase as if spitting out something bitter. No response. Ayanna held the folded cloth against her chest, as if it were a sacred flag. The manager took 2 steps forward, invading their space. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with cheap disinfectant. The contrast stung the air, but the girls didn't back down. They remained planted, their roots deep in soil that wasn't theirs, but which they held with dignity borrowed from previous generations. In the VIP area, the man in the gray suit jotted down another line on his cell phone. His fingers were quick, his expression impassive. A security guard near the register watched the tension rise, but remained motionless, a passive accomplice to a violence that didn't require punches to inflict damage. Customers pretended to check shelves, adjust bags, anything to avoid witnessing the obvious. An elderly woman swerved her cart, muttering something inaudible. A man in a suit discreetly took a picture with his cell phone, but didn't intervene. The manager crossed her arms again, trying to regain visual control of the scene, but something had changed. The triplets' silence was no longer empty. It was occupied, filled with something she couldn't name, but felt in her stomach like a heavy stone. Ayanna lifted her chin a millimeter. A barely perceptible gesture, but revolutionary in that context. Amara intertwined her fingers with Nia's, joining forces in a silent chain. The manager opened her mouth to speak, but closed it. For the first time, there was no audience. There were judges. The gesture of calm became the new center of the scene, and she lost the script. The first cell phone camera rose slowly, almost embarrassed. Then another, and 3 more. Discreet flashes cut through the air like digital witnesses to a violence that left no visible marks. The manager felt her eyes turn, no longer to the girls, but to her. She straightened her blazer, forced a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Whispers began to erupt between the aisles of imported products. "Did they provoke you?" A blonde woman murmured, leaning towards her friend. "It must have been a misunderstanding," replied the other, but her tone carried a hint of doubt. The manager raised her hands theatrically, her voice rising an octave. "Guys, it's a joke. You know how it is. These girls are too sensitive." No one laughed. The silence that should have been her ally now weighed against her. A black man at the cashier, impeccable uniform and graying hair, looked down. He recognized the scene because he'd lived through it before. Old shame rose up in his chest like a familiar ghost. He pressed the scanner harder than necessary, beep after beep sounding like a racing heartbeat. Ayana held Amara's hand. Amara held Nia's. 3 fingers intertwined, forming an unbreakable chain. The older woman took a deep breath, feeling the weight of all those gazes, some sympathetic, many curious, some cruel. A tear ran down Nia's face and fell onto the floorcloth she still held. The drop spread across the fabric like a silent confession, but she didn't sob. She didn't give the audience the spectacle they'd expected. In the box, the man in the gray suit pressed the elevator button. The metal slid with a mechanical whisper. He glanced down at the girls one last time before the doors closed, not with pity, but with something heavier. Recognition. The elevator began to descend, each floor a second less until justice arrived. The manager tried to laugh again, but the sound was hollow. She looked around for allies and found only social mirrors reflecting back her own distorted image. Shame had finally changed hands. The cameras continued to roll, and the sound of the elevator descending echoed like a countdown. Have you ever seen such injustice and remained silent? Comment. The man was coming down. Time slowed. The supermarket's fluorescent light seemed to flicker, and for an instant, Ayana was no longer there. She stood at the edge of an ancient river, water running over smooth stones. Black hands silently washed wounds, not wounds of the body, but of the soul. Hands that carried children, built houses, sewed dreams from scraps. Hands that were never dirty, only forged in the fire of survival. Grandma's voice echoed from somewhere deep in her memory. Our hands were never dirty, girl. They were forged. Ayana blinked. She came back to the present, but something had shifted in her chest. An invisible thread connected that humiliation to the suffering of entire generations, and also to their resilience. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with air that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. Amara and Nia did the same, almost in sync, 3 chests rising and falling like an ancient tide. It wasn't a coincidence. It was blood remembering itself. A beam of light passed through the high glass of the box and bathed the 3 girls, a soft, almost celestial gold, cutting through the white coldness of the room. Ayana lifted her face to the light, eyes closed for 2 seconds. When she opened them, there was no longer any fear, only a silent certainty that she occupied this space by right, not by permission. Amara straightened her worn uniform with the same dignity a queen might adjust a velvet cloak. Nia wiped away the tear that still clung to the corner of her eye and straightened her spine, vertebra by vertebra, as if erecting a monument. The supermarket's ambient soundtrack seemed to fade. All that remained was collective breathing, the beating of hearts in 3 synchronized chests, and the distant sound of the elevator descending. The manager continued speaking, but her words no longer carried weight. They were mere noise against an older, more solid truth. The girls remained still, but something in them had moved. Not geographically, spiritually. The pain became memory. The memory became strength, and the strength began to shine through the skin like its own light. In the reflection of the clean floor, 3 shadows seemed larger than the bodies that cast them. Ancestry doesn't ask permission, it just awakens. The elevator opened behind the manager. The metallic sound of the elevator cut through the air like a sharp blade. The doors slid open, revealing the man in the gray suit. His steps were firm, measured, each one echoing on the floor like a spoken sentence. He walked down the hallway with an erect posture, broad shoulders taking up space without arrogance, just an irrefutable presence. The murmur of customers ceased. Cell phone cameras turned to the new figure on stage. The manager turned and recognized him immediately. The professional smile returned to her face, but her eyes betrayed fear. "Mr. Caldwell," she exclaimed, her voice rising artificially. "We didn't expect your visit today." He didn't answer immediately. He stopped 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, his gaze sweeping the scene like slow motion, capturing every detail. The triplets remained motionless, watching. The silence grew dense, almost solid. Caldwell tilted his head slightly, studying the manager as if examining a poorly executed project. "Is this part of the training?" he asked. His voice was low, restrained, but heavy with a weight that made the air vibrate. The manager stammered. She opened her mouth, closed it, and opened it again. "I was just... They dropped the bucket and you suggested they clean it with their tongues." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Each word fell like a brick in the construction of an inevitable truth. The manager tried to laugh, a sound that came out like shattering glass. "It was a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to. I meant exactly what I said." Caldwell took 2 steps forward. The manager took 1 step back. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to threaten. He simply existed in that space with authority that didn't demand validation. The triplets watched, their faces serene, but something shone in Ayana's eyes. It wasn't revenge. It was validation. Amara let out a long sigh, releasing the tension pent up in her shoulders. Nia finally lifted her chin. The audience resumed filming. Discreet flashes multiplied. The manager looked around for salvation and found only witnesses. Caldwell didn't look away for a second. The control she'd exerted over the space for years was slipping through her fingers like fine sand. She tried to smile again, but her facial muscles wouldn't budge. Her social mask cracked in half. The girls' silence spoke louder than any accusation. Caldwell slowly raised his right hand, fingers sliding into the inside pocket of his jacket. The movement seemed to last forever. Customers held their breath. The manager blinked rapidly, nervously, trying to anticipate what was coming. He removed a gold badge, its surface reflecting artificial light like a small mirror. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, letting everyone see it. The coat of arms engraved on the metal was unmistakable, the supermarket chain's logo, but with an added detail. Owner. "These girls are interns for my social project," Caldwell said, his voice cutting through the silence like a precise razor. The murmur exploded instantly. Heads turned, mouths opened, cell phones trembled in astonished hands. The manager paled 3 shades in 2 seconds. She tried to speak, but her tongue felt like lead. Words died in her throat before they could be born. Caldwell stowed away her badge, each gesture measured, choreographed by the patience of someone who has already won. "Project Roots," she continued. "Young black women from peripheral communities undergoing professional training." Ayana felt her chest tighten, not with pain, but with something she couldn't yet name. Recognition. Public validation. Amara squeezed her sister's hand with renewed strength. Nia finally dropped the mop into the bucket and straightened her shoulders completely. The manager opened her mouth to justify herself, but Caldwell held up his hand, cutting off any attempt. "No need to explain. I've seen it all." He pointed discreetly to the box. The security cameras, the perfect angle, a complete record of the humiliation. The manager trembled visibly. Ayana stepped forward, a small but powerful gesture. She picked up the bucket with both hands and placed it at Caldwell's feet, not in submission, but in respect. acknowledging an unexpected alliance. He nodded slightly, silent approval. "Today," he said, his voice rising just enough to reach everyone present. "The one who cleans is the one who sees." The sentence hung in the air like a decree. The manager swallowed hard. The audience remained frozen, torn between shock and admiration. Flashbulbs continued to go off. Someone in the back applauded timidly. Another joined in. Another. The sound grew slowly, not deafening, but steady. Caldwell didn't smile. He simply watched the scene with the restrained satisfaction of someone who sows justice and awaits the harvest. The oppressor became submissive. Dignity changed in form, but not in essence. Caldwell took 3 steps toward the manager. Not quickly, not threateningly, just inevitable. She backed away until her back touched the shelf of imported wines. Bottles clinked softly, a fragile sound breaking the solid tension. He stopped a meter away, his advantageous height forcing her to lift her chin to maintain eye contact. His eyes held no anger. They held something heavier, disappointment measured in years of betrayed trust. "How many times?" he asked, his voice low but penetrating. Sir? How many times have you told someone to humble themselves to feel great?" The manager tried to laugh. The sound came out broken, pathetic, a hollow echo of a power I no longer possessed. She opened her mouth to respond, but her voice faltered on the first phoneme. She swallowed hard. She tried again. It was just today. Misunderstanding. Lie. The word fell like an axe. Dry. Final. Caldwell crossed his arms, his relaxed posture contrasting with the intensity of his gaze. Behind him, the triplets stood, shoulders straight, faces serene. There was no hatred in their expressions, only presence. Existence asserted in a territory they'd tried to deny them. Ayanna took a deep breath, air coming in slowly, going out even slower. Amara held Nia's hand, fingers intertwined in a chain no one would ever break. The audience began to applaud. Not explosive, not theatrical, spontaneous and quiet, like rain beginning to fall. Scattered applause gradually grew in volume, filling the space with collective approval. The manager looked around, searching for defense, finding only silent judges who had finally chosen sides. Tears welled in the corners of her eyes, not of regret, of exposure, of a mask ripped off in a public square. Caldwell tilted his head slightly, studying her like someone observing a creature in a zoo. "Today," he said, each syllable spaced, heavy. "The ground reflects who we are." He pointed to the gleaming white floor. The manager followed the gesture with her eyes and saw her own distorted reflection in the surface, a mascara-smudged face, a hunched posture, a disintegrated power. The triplets also looked down. They saw 3 faces reflected back, illuminated by the light streaming through the glass. Dignity mirrored, truth restored. What if you were in their place? What would you do? The humiliation became a moral mirror, and no one liked what they saw in the manager. Caldwell turned to the triplets. The movement was smooth, deliberate, like closing one chapter and opening another. He extended his right hand, palm open, revealing 3 new badges. Dark blue plastic with engraved gold lettering. The supermarket light made them shine like small medals of honor. Ayanna stepped forward, hesitant at first, firm at the second. She picked up the first badge. Her fingers trembled as they touched the smooth plastic. "Starting today," Caldwell said, her voice clear and audible to everyone in the hallway, "you are team coordinators." The silence that followed was thick as fog. Then it exploded. Applause vibrated through the space, no longer contained but released. Clapping rang out loudly, echoing between shelves of products that had witnessed injustice and now witnessed reparation. Amara and Nia took their badges, eyes teary but smiles hidden at the corners of their lips. It wasn't a shouted victory. It was dignity regained at an appropriate volume. The manager was escorted out by 2 security guards. She didn't resist. She simply walked with her head down, her stiletto heels scraping against the floor like a sound of defeat. No one defended her, no one protested. The audience watched in respectful silence as she disappeared through the side door. Her absence left a vacuum that was quickly filled by something lighter. Hope, perhaps. Or simply justice taking up space that should always have been hers. Ayanna looked at the badge in her hand. She read the engraved name, Ayanna Santos, Operations Coordinator. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the object, not physical, but symbolic. She bent down slowly and picked up the mop from the bucket. Caldwell arched an eyebrow curiously. She wet it, wrung it carefully, and cleaned a small stain on the floor. Not by order, not by humiliation, by choice. To show that honest work was never shameful, only the dehumanization of it. When he finished, he stood and looked at his reflection in the clean floor. 3 faces stared back, serene, victorious, whole. The supermarket soundtrack started playing again, but this time it sounded different. Lighter. Caldwell watched with discreet pride, hands in his pockets, the relaxed posture of someone who has planted a seed and watched it sprout. Share the story if you believe dignity has no color. The humiliating gesture became a symbol of power, and the ground finally reflected the truth. The camera closed in on the 3 women's hands, fingers intertwined, their dark skin contrasting with the white cleaning cloth they still held, not as a tool of submission, but as a trophy of a battle won. Ayanna ran her thumb over the rough texture of the cloth, feeling every fiber as if touching a sacred relic. Amara smiled for the first time since it all began, a small but genuine smile. Naya wiped away the last tear, replacing it with a new gleam in her eyes. Hope. A voice emerged, not from the surroundings, but from a deeper place, a narration that could be memory or universal truth. Not all shine comes from gold. Some comes from those who never gave up. The gleaming floor reflected the 3 faces, now smiling. Not the broad smiles of advertising, but the subtle curvature of lips that had known pain and chosen dignity. The floor that should have been an instrument of shame became a mirror of victory. Each reflection carried history, not just of that day, but of generations who had cleaned, built, and sustained entire worlds without recognition. Until now, Caldwell took a step back, away from the center of the scene. He wasn't the protagonist, never had been, just an ally who appeared at the right moment. He walked toward the elevator, anonymous again, but satisfied. Job done, justice served. The rest was up to them. Before entering, he turned one last time. He waved discreetly. The triplets returned his gestures in sync, 3 hands raised in gratitude and farewell. The audience still watched, but the tone had completely changed. It was no longer voyeuristic of someone else's tragedy. It was a respectful testimony of rebirth. A black customer approached, extended his hand to Ayanna. She shook it firmly. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The gesture carried everything. Others approached. Silent greetings. Looks that apologized for a previous omission. The light filtered through the supermarket's tall glass for the last time, bathing the clean floor in soft gold. The triplets stood there in the center of the aisle, occupying space that had always been rightfully theirs. Slow fade. The image froze in that moment. 3 black girls standing, badges shining on their chests, the floor reflecting the sky. Text appeared on the screen, white letters on a dark background. Respect is not asked for. It is imposed with dignity. Sign up and empower these voices of courage and truth. From trauma to hope, the floor was now an altar.